Hello and welcome to Books Up Close. I'm Chris Lloyd. This is the close reading show for writers, readers, and anyone that wants to know how texts get made. Today I talked to Madeleine Dunnigan about her novel Jean, or Jean. We'll get into that very shortly. We're going to talk about a section quite late in the book, so go get your copy. Madeleine Dunnigan is a writer and screenwriter from London. She was a Jill Davis Fellow on the MFA at New York University. While there, she was awarded the Global Research Initiative Fellowship in Paris. Her first novel, Jean, was published by Daunt Books in the UK and WW Norton in the US, and will be translated into Spanish, German, and Italian. She's currently at work on her debut feature film, commissioned by Film 4. Hi, Madeleine. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So today we are talking about... I can't even get to this, right? Because the novel... I picked up and I was like, Jean. And I was like, no, it's Jean. And then the whole novel unpacks some of this in terms of how you say the name. And how do you say the name of this book?
I used to say Jean, and then my publishers were like, it's Jean.
Oh, really?
For the English-speaking market, it's Jean. But I think, that crystallizes one of the central problems that Jean or Jean faces, is this one of an unstable identity. So his mother, Rosa, is a German Jewish refugee, an artist, bohemian, single mother, virulent socialist, not religious by any means of the word, and a huge Francophile, and has named her son Jean, and she calls him Jean. But in the UK, particularly in the British boarding school system, that name is bastardized into its English equivalent, which is Jean, which is a girl's name. Obviously, there is the boy's Jean, but it's spelled differently. So Jean or Jean occupies this kind of grey zone where people say his name differently, they say it wrong, that they ask him why he has a girl's name, and it kind of enhances or intensifies feelings of alienation he might have.
Yeah. And I think that what's interesting is that's an intertextual issue has now become extra textual with readers and publishers and how we talk about the book. So I think it's kind of expanded from the book to outside of it.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, I get the question all the time, and and annoyingly I don't have a fixed answer. I say, it's how you want to say it. Probably I'm a bit of a Rosa, I would want to say Jean. I want to say Barcelona,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's really up to the reader.
Yeah. Okay. Because I said Jean in my head all the way through it, and then there's bits when they say otherwise, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, the boys in that boarding school environment in 1976 aren't saying Jean. They're saying Jean. Yeah. And the teachers are saying Jean.
Yeah. Well, I've got this beautiful copy here. I mean, you're not going to see it on the audio, but I'm just showing so you can see it in front of me with my little post-it notes in it. So before we get into a particular passage, and we're going to read from later in the book, listeners, so if you do want to read along, get it out, and it's on page 197 of the Daunt copy, so you can prepare yourselves. But anyway, before we get there, how do you feel, Madeleine, about close reading as a practice, an activity? What is your relationship to it?
Such a good question. When I was first asked to do this, I was very, very excited because I love close reading. I think I did English literature, and it was the foundation and the bedrock of how I have read books and prose and literature and poetry and even plays, any kind of text. And so it's, I suppose, the bedrock of how I put sentences of my own together. But then since agreeing to do the podcast, and as it's come closer and closer to the podcast deadline, I've had this swirling sense of dread at close reading my own work, which I'm wondering how it will feel and how it will go, and also being put into the position of having to justify language choices, or not even necessarily justify it, but understand, because as I write, I don't think so consciously about my word choice. I think that comes later, and I'm sure I don't always get it right. I think I use things instinctively, and sometimes my boyfriend will point out that I've just used them completely incorrectly. So It's like, yeah, I feel mixed. I'm really excited. I love close reading, and I used to have a class at university which was just purely close reading. We'd be given a poem every week, and you just have to close read it, and that was like such a pleasure. But doing it on your own work is a bit like pulling out all of your knickers and showing which ones have holes in that you still wear.
That's a great image. When you had those poems in class, would they be kind of like anonymized in a way? Like, would you get the title and the author, or?
I think a mixture.
Mm,
Sometimes
mm,
we didn't, and it was sort of a test of our knowledge, which none of us had because we were
mhm.
18 and hadn't read the
Yeah.
English literature canon. And other times you had the title and the author because that would inform maybe the way you read the poem.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I've been interested in doing this show is A, being like, this is what I do in a literature classroom with my students, but I'm just going to do it with the author themselves and see what they see in relation to what I see. But also, I'm not pretending like this is decontextualized, right? Like, our conversation will inevitably go towards those other things because I don't think you can do a pure close reading without wanting to like go out a little bit, right? You're going to kind
No,
of spill
completely.
out.
And, imagine being able to talk to all of those incredible writers.
Yeah.
Not saying, but I am not, but I would say imagine being able to talk to Tennyson about his choices, or Eliot, that would be
Yeah.
incredible. And I think also I love close reading because I actually struggled in English for some time. I had an English teacher once tell me not to apply for English at university and not to compare myself to my sister because she was so much better,
Wow.
which was pretty rough going. But it was when I learned how to close read that things kind of clicked into place, because it can be quite scary to be confronted with a passage of text and be told to analyze it, and you're like, what do you mean, where do I begin? And close reading sort of offering that step by step journey through a text. Just begin at the beginning and take it sentence by sentence and see what builds as you go, really sort of then made the subject come alive for me, and I kind of haven't stopped doing it.
I mean, we're going to look at a bit from quite late in the book. I took a while to choose a passage because I thought we could start at the beginning. There's some interesting bits in the middle, but they weren't quite exemplary of the rest of the books. Then I was like, I'm just going to pick this nice little moment later on, which is in chapter 10, I want to say. No, 9. And it's kind of the two boys who are at the boarding school. This is Tom and Jean. And they're doing some kind of like walk outside. They're all forced to do this kind of like trek, right? They have to like plot their journey and things. And this is a little moment where they have like met up. And it's a really sweet, quiet moment, like a super quiet moment. And I chose it for that reason, because I thought, there's something in the quietness that we could maybe talk about. But why don't you read it first and then we can like talk about it more fully?
Yeah. The next day, they move their camp from Sweet Willow Wood to a stretch of deserted beach directly on the coast. It is another beautiful day, and the sand is bright hot and burning. They strip off and swim before setting up camp, Jean erecting the tent, Tom the fire. They move around each other quietly and with ease. Although they are not talking, it is different from yesterday's silence. When they both reach for the canteen, their hands brushing, each pulls away self-consciously. Last night, when they got back to camp, Tom climbed into his sleeping bag and fell asleep immediately. Jean stayed up worrying, but that fear has dissipated throughout today. There are still times when Tom will leave him, his face turning blank, his eyes sunken and hollow, as if someone has turned off his batteries. But these moments don't last for long, and Jean doesn't need to know where he has gone. They switch between lounging and swimming. Behind them is a small wood where, Jean shows Tom, a beehive sits precariously in the branches of a horse chestnut. Jean makes Tom come with his mouth. Tom makes Jean with his hand. Tom goes wooding for the fire, and they cook mackerel they bought from a roadside truck for dinner. The skin blackens and blisters, and when they put the fish between two hunks of bread, oil oozes onto their knees. There is ale and more tomato. They lie on the sand and watch the sun dip below the horizon. Jean wants to know if the sun sets at the same point every day, and Tom tells him no. It moves with the earth. They will be fine, Jean thinks, and leans back on his elbows when they go to China. With Tom there, they won't get lost. And with him, he can bring his tent. He can pick herbs. He says this to Tom. I'll bring a book on Chinese plants. But Tom is lying with his eyes closed.
Thank you so much. What's interesting is listening to you read it, I noticed things I didn't just reading it with my eyes, which is kind of interesting. And one of the main things I thought about this passage is this, the kind of quietness that I mentioned, but also something you do that I find interesting, which is like, there's a sentence of kind of like plain description, and then the next sentence is like quite different from that. I'm going to give you an example in a minute. And then you go back to this other thing. And there's this real kind of interplay of, wait, did I just miss something, right? That I find really full of, I don't want to say tension, that's probably too strong a word, but there's some kind of like friction there. For example, they switch between lounging and swimming. Behind them is a small wood where Jean shows Tom, I'll talk about the commas in a minute, a beehive sits precariously on the branches of a horse chestnut. Jean makes Tom come with his mouth. Tom makes Jean with his hand. Tom goes wooding to the fire. Like that sentence in between of their like sexuality is, it doesn't lead up to that. Like the paragraph doesn't lead us there, but it kind of just like drops in the middle after this precarious beehive. And then we go on to like cooking the mackerel. I'm like, wait. And I think it's a real kind of note for people when I say about like slower reading, right? I think if you're a quick speed reader, there are moments like that where you could easily just like jump over it, right? That you could just fly by. And I'm interested in how this like slow accretion of details has these little bits in between that like give us actually way more information than you might think in what seems like a very descriptive passage, if that makes sense.
So it's interesting that you picked that, because that used to be a whole dramatized scene when they were in this new section, this new stretch. So like you said, this is chapter 9, I guess. In filmic terms, it's the bottleneck chapter of the book, where they leave the school, they go on a wilderness hike, they're meant to do it alone, they meet up secretly, and we have this very long chapter where it's just Jean and Tom, which has never really happened before. They've never just been the two of them for an extended period of time. It's always been snatches at night or in the afternoon. They don't acknowledge each other in school. Their relationship or their friendship is, that even just their friendship is hidden, let alone the kind of romantic overtones to it. And I was really struggling with what to dramatize and what not to dramatize. And before this scene, you have quite a detailed scene of them having sex, and it's the first time penetrative sex, so it's quite a big deal for both of them, and especially for Jean. And when I got to this scene again, I was like, well, they are teenage boys, they are incredibly sexually active, they think about it all the time. It's not going to be one-stop shop. But in terms of the rhythm and pace of the book and how much one lingers on which parts and which actions, I wanted us to have a moment here which created a sense of the quotidien or the mundanity or the kind of simple ease of the day that they're having together, that it isn't fraught, because so much is fraught. And so all of these actions that are just layered next to each other, almost paratactically or associatively, I guess, maybe that's the word, was about showing that lounging, swimming, eating, fucking, they all sort of just come with the pace of the day. And they're not major moments. But I also had to kind of fit bits in for plot. So for example, like you note here, that beehive will come to be significant later in the chapter. I had to have it there. But I was like, where would a beehive be? And like it was sort of like, it was really like, I was like, I really need a beehive, or I need some bees, because Tom gets stung later on. Yeah, so it was about sort of fitting key bits of information in, but also just creating a sense of time passing through actions and none of these actions kind of taking the foreground.
And there's like no, to kind of build on, there's like no speech in this little passage, right? Or there is, but it's kind of reported speech. Like he says this to Tom, I'll bring a book on Chinese plants. That's not in like quote marks. There's no, or, you know, it's not kind of deliberately.
Well, that would be the one bit of speech that if this book used quotation marks, which I think is much to the chagrin of many readers that it doesn't. The next one does. That would be in quotation marks, but it's because of the way time is operating, because it's a sort of continuous flow of things happening, and we're not deeply in a scene. It's kind of hovers there, I think, a bit. This sense that, you know, I mean, they are in a scene at the very end of this paragraph, because they lie on the sand and watch the sun dip below the horizon, and then Jean wants to know, and all of this is reported. So they are there in this scene, but they're also sort of like hovering slightly outside of time, I feel, because it's time passing.
Yeah. And I think the like present tense of the whole thing like adds to that. Like there's slipping backwards, right? Like last night when they got back, but then there are still times when Tom will leave him. They switch between like this kind of present tense that is multiple timelines at once, right? There's lots of reflection back and reflection forward. And I think that haziness is kind of indicative of the whole book in a way, this kind of, because it's set over this like very hot summer. And I think you get a sense throughout the book of, I don't know, it reminded me of a few other books, but that kind of moment of like teenagehood when time feels like so expansive, but is so compressed at the same time, right? It could feel like 10 years, but it's like, wait, this is really not that long.
You feel like you have forever, but you also can't conceive of the future. So there's both this sense of like timelessness is both rooted in a continual or a continuous notion of time, but it's also completely outside of time because you have no concept of it. You're like, the future? What? That doesn't exist.
But that's quite liberatory and kind of terrifying, right? Because for Jean John, like so often it's like, well, if it doesn't happen now, it's never gonna happen, right? It's like the idea that it might happen in a few days is like, well, that's intolerable, right? Because all we've got is now. And I think the book could easily have been written in just like simple past tense, but it isn't. And I think that adds to that slipperiness. But I'm like interested in the third person, right? I can also easily imagine this as a first person novel. And the third person is quite detached at times. Like it's not, well, it depends on where you are in the book, but in this little passage you just read, there isn't much like free and direct discourse, right? We don't often delve into Jean's perspective necessarily. There are like moments, but in general, we're kind of, we're not in Jean's kind of thoughts or Jean's language necessarily. And I think that moving in and out is always interesting to me when authors do that.
Well, the third person felt very necessary to the novel because Jean is someone who struggles with language. It's not his medium of expression. I mean, he is dyslexic. He struggles with emotional nuance. I think probably these days he'd be called neurodivergent or would definitely be on the autistic spectrum. And so writing a book, it would be a very different book if I wrote it in the first person, because it would need to be true to his modes of expression, which I think are very different from my own. So I used third person because that gave me the license to use language and introduce concepts and ideas that Jean himself wouldn't necessarily use or be able to formulate, whilst also absorbing his thoughts, his language patterns, his ideas. So you have a little bit of his language or his ideas at the end of the second paragraph. Jean doesn't need to know that Tom is gone. And then again at the end of the third paragraph. But yes, you're right. This is a moment where if the third person hovers kind of at Jean's back and sort of in his throat, we're definitely at his back watching him a bit.
Yeah, like even like there are still times when Tom will leave him. Like leave him feels like Jean's experience of that, right? Like as the like his face turning blank, his eyes sunken and hollow. Like that's just someone kind of zoning out or feeling like confused, but to Jean that's like abandonment, right? Like that's like so like you get those little moments, but here it isn't like throughout. And I think that also adds to this like a moment of tranquility, both for the boys and for the reader maybe too, right? Like as you say in the kind of structure of the book, that we need a moment where we aren't totally enmeshed in Jean's like confusion. Not least
Yeah.
because, you know, I was a teenage boy who was confused about queerness. So like it often felt like claustrophobic. I was like, I know this is stressful. but at the same time, within the book, like for them to have a moment where they just sit and eat and be, I don't know, like obviously you're not thinking about the reader necessarily, but there is a sense of like everyone taking a breath collectively.
Yes, what you were saying about, I did think a lot about the reader, and I thought about the reader needing a break, and I think that quite a lot of the novel can feel quite intense and quite intensely in Jean's psyche, like you said. And particularly this chapter, because it's the climax, literally and sexually,
Mhm.
um, of the novel, and something is coming to pass between them, and we're actually about to go into another passage where something else difficult happens. It felt really important to have these moments of pause, to have these moments of breath, to sort of have these prose like caesuras where you kind of have this rest and you're like, okay, before we transition. And I really love that you picked this passage. It's one of my favorites to read.
Yeah, there's something really soft even about the sound of it too, right? Not just in kind of what we were saying, but like sweet willow wood to a stretch of deserted beach directly on the coast. Like there's tons of like sibilance and like softness. The sand is bright, hot, and burning. They strip off and swim before setting up camp. Jean, like there's a pace, there's a rhythm to this of like softness. They move around each other quietly and with ease. Like I think you're aiming for ease in like the sound of it too. And there's a few examples of like Jean erecting the tent, Tom the fire, right? This kind of like balancing almost at the level of the sentence between like the two of them, which then is like echoed in the kind of sexual Jean makes Tom come with his mouth. I need to come back to that sentence though, because I've seen something that I didn't see the first time. So I'm gonna let us pin that before I forget it. But there's like a not equanimity, because it's not an easy power relation between the two boys, right? It's not quite equal, I don't think, in terms of what they see of each other, but at the level of the sentence, you do these, yeah, kind of weighing things up, maybe, or like a kind of balancing back and forth, and sometimes it drifts off. And I don't know whether any of that is like conscious as you're writing, or whether it comes later.
I think it was conscious when I came to editing it, and in the editing, therefore, wrote this passage where I felt like it was again this question of it's such a long chapter, it's twice the length of the other chapters in the novel, and I wanted to have this real sense that you are just with the boys for this whole time. You almost forget the outside world, and it's just them, and that's just really wonderfully sort of not like this bubble that they have together. And I think the sentences, you're right, reflect that desire for creating some balance. I noticed that I do a thing where I omit the verb to create the balance. So Jean erecting the tent, Tom the fire, and you're right, I do that with the sexual. So I omit erecting again. You know, Jean erects the tent, Tom, I could say Tom erects the fire, but I remove that verb. And then I do it again with the sexual act. Jean makes Tom come with his mouth. Tom makes Jean with his hand. So you remove the verb come. I don't know why I do that. I think because it creates this balance, but it's just slightly off as well. And I don't know, maybe that speaks to your idea that there's balance here, but there's also underlying it power imbalance.
Yeah. And there are these moments, these other kind of like, I don't know, grammatical, lexical, I don't know what to call them, moments of where you do these little clauses, right? So later on in that passage, they will be fine, comma, Jean thinks and leans back on his elbows when they go to China. Right. And I think you're delaying the when they go to China because there's a moment of like, they will be fine, Jean thinks, when they go to China. You're like, you know, like it actually, it's pulled away from us actually that they're going to be fine forever. They're going to be fine in this fantasy of them going to China together, right? Which is never going to, like, I don't know, like as we're reading, we're like, this is never happening, boys. But, you know, like I love the idea. You could have had, they will be fine when they go to China, Jean thinks and leans back on his elbows. But instead you put this like clause in the middle. And you do it a couple of times in here. Where is that other one? Oh, like when they both reach for the canteen, their hands brushing, each pulls away self-consciously. This is constant like pausing between, I don't know, like the sentence is interrupted. You do it a couple of times, and I think that interruption makes us think about the multiple options that could happen there. And I think it adds, again, like, I'm not saying tension, because tension is too strong, but like friction of some kind.
That's such a nice way of putting it. I really love that idea of this kind of thinking about the possibilities of the sentence could be, and that speaking to like the possibilities that Jean or Jean could have had or could have in life, but then it always falls into something different or inevitable. I know I do it a lot, and I would love to know what the grammatical term is. Is it like a split clause something, where the what is the part of the sentence that defines it, but the defining part of the sentence is always delayed? I did find when I received the copy edit of this book back, though, that I really don't know how to use commas. And when I write, I often just, the comma just pops in when I'm taking a breath, and that is not how the comma should be used. So I spend a lot of time, there's that joke where, who was it? It was Dostoevsky or something, or maybe Joseph Conrad was asked how his writing day was, and it's like, in the morning I added a comma, in the afternoon I deleted a comma. I spent so much time deleting commas when I was editing this, because they were just littered everywhere.
You're not the only person on this show to have said that. Sean Hewitt, me and Sean, we had a long conversation about his commas, and his editor that just said, there's a lot of commas here, Sean. And he was like, yeah, I know. They're like, we need to talk about them. So comma fiends, this is the episode for you. Go back to Sean's episode. You'll enjoy it.
Similarities with the books.
There are so many similarities between these two books, actually. That was the first one that I thought of as I was reading this. I was also thinking of like Philippe Besson. I was thinking of like Lie With Me. I don't know if you know that book. That one kind of rose in my mind. But yeah, there's something about these whatever we're calling them, these clauses, these interruptions, that the other one I found, I'll say in a minute, which is about the beehive, that the grammar feels, whether you're thinking about it or not as a writer, like the grammar is doing something to us as we read slowly. And I think you're forcing us to read slowly here, because it is this kind of like dialing down of the tension that we've had for like so long in this book, right? And like the book starts off with Jean being kind of like chastised by the like headmaster, right, about something. And it kind of begins on a moment of like friction and like fraughtness. And here, even the other example was, behind them is a small wood where Jean shows Tom a beehive sits precariously. Like that sentence could be formatted anyway, right? Like a beehive sits precariously, or Jean shows Tom a beehive that sits, whatever. But behind them is a small wood, which sounds really nice. And then you're like, there's a precarious beehive. You're like, oh no, thanks, Madeleine. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that's the Chekhov's gun moment, right? Like that this kind of like a nice description of a small wood turns into something potentially threatening, right? Or something might tip over. And I think that tipping over is like quite strong throughout in the book. Even, like the oil drips out of the bread, the sun dips below the horizon. There's lots of things, like just like teetering over.
I didn't notice that. That's such a lovely reading of the passage. Things shifting, things tipping over, sliding out of sight, or just turning into something that's a bit sinister or has the potential for threat and danger. And you're right, I am making the reader slow down, because when you have sentences like that where they're split apart, we can learn the correct grammatical terms another time, but it's forcing the reader to hold multiple bits of information in their mind before they will come together and make sense.
Yeah.
So that there's a small wood, and then Jean's showing something to Tom, but you don't know what that thing is until the very end.
Yeah.
I think sometimes some people would, it's making us aware always of the agents. Like, you wouldn't necessarily need to say Jean shows Tom. You could just say where a beehive sits precariously. But it's like putting in the agency of the boys, or sort of they become little actors. Which again, I don't know if that makes it sort of more distancing or closer.
Yeah, or like both, because when Jean wants to know if the sun sets at the same point every day, and Tom tells him no, it moves with the earth. Like Jean is so desperate, like as all these things are tipping over the edge, like Jean is like, well, okay, it's slipping out of sight, but at least if it could happen in the same spot, like I might be able to do something with that. And Tom's like, nope, everything keeps moving. It moves with the earth. And that sounds like a very like natural thing, right? It's just part and parcel. But to Jean, I think that's like a really scary idea that things will constantly be moving, right? That there isn't that kind of solidity.
Yeah. And that's kind of the residing theme of his life. Things aren't stable. They always shift.
Yeah, 100%. And the line that I kind of started with and I want to return to, that only as you read it out that I heard it, this kind of Jean makes Tom come with his mouth, semicolon. Tom makes Jean with his hand. And I know you said like in the early one, you could have repeated like erecting the tent, erecting the fire. And here you could say Tom makes Jean come with his hand, but you leave out the come. So it's Tom makes Jean with his hand. And I don't know, like when I heard you read it, like the idea of like making Jean, right, as though he's bringing Jean into being. And this is the thing about close reading that I'm always saying, right? It's like it's just me reading with all of the stuff that I have in my brain. But there's a chapter at the end of Justin Torres's book, We the Animals. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yeah.
Right. And the chapter is called The Night I Am Made. And the night I am made is the night that like he finally has anal sex with this guy and he's like, I am made, as though the act has like, it hasn't just confirmed him as being queer, but it is like, it has constructed him in that way, right? That I always kind of read psychoanalytically. But anyway, like this interesting here about like Jean makes Tom come with his hand, which is just like an act, versus Tom makes Jean with his hand. And there's some element of construction there that I think is interesting that I hadn't seen and now makes loads of sense with this, where it is in the book.
You know, I would love to say it was artfully constructed, and I think that's such a brilliant close reading, but I was not aware of it. And I love that book by Justin Torres, and it was an influence on Jean. I turned to my brothers when I was otherwise lost in this novel, reading to understand maybe experiences that I didn't have access to. And that was one book that really captures the becoming of queer identity, but also the sort of enmeshed violence and fear that can come with that. But yeah, Tom makes Jean with his hand can be read as in a completely different way, as a completely different sentence, because the only verb there is makes. And I think you're completely right with that. There is a sense that Tom is bringing Jean into becoming, and Jean is becoming who, by the end of the novel, Jean has come to a place of greater knowledge or greater self knowledge and a clear identity of who he is. And I guess there's also like come is in become, you know, there's arrival in that, there's all of these words come back to senses of being made, constructed, arriving, existing.
You know, and like when they go to China with Tom there, they won't get lost. With him, he can bring his tent. Like when they go to this new place that is like completely, you know, quote unquote foreign to them, right? Like that's probably in quote marks of a word, isn't it? Like it's a place so far away from their experience that like they won't get lost and they'll have like shelter, right? Those two things that they're kind of relying on each other for, kind of a stability, a home life, a kind of contentment. So the idea of like making, finding, like dwelling, like there's so much in these three very quiet paragraphs that are just about them sitting down and having a fire. But I think it opens up lots of the questions that the book has about these two boys, like imagining the future for them, right? That Jean clearly has Tom in his mind in the future, but whether Tom has Jean in his mind in the future is like a whole other thing.
That's and I think I want to leave that open in the novel. I want there to, like you said, there are many different possibilities. I want it to feel kind of unstable and unclear how much Tom loves Jean when Tom, and it's about the caprices of being a teenager as well. It could, and everything can be true at once. He can love him in one moment, be annoyed with him in another, be disgusted by him in another, and then not even think of him. And it's definitely for Jean, the future, Tom sort of is so linked to his future, but Jean isn't linked to Tom's future.
Which is very sad in this book, by the way. Can I digress before I ask you about your writing practice? You were taught by Garth Greenwell. Yes. I also know you were taught by Katie Kitamura. And like those two are my prose parents. Like, those two people, I will read anything they write at any point in their careers. They know I am devoted to them. These are like my idols, right? Of the people that care about sentences and what sentences can do. What is it like studying with these people?
Intimidating, daunting, exciting, thrilling, inevitably disappointing in oneself, because to study with someone you admire so much is to crave their approval in such a craven and base way that they can never give you, because what you really deep down desperately want is something that no person can give you. But for this novel, it was also unbelievably helpful and transformative. And I've said many times that it was a class I studied with Garth Greenwell on sex writing that really transformed the sex in this book. Clearly I'm not a young queer male, not a teenager, and not in the 1970s. So it was there were limitations to my writing and on all levels, but also particularly with the sex, like trying to create intimacy, fraughtness, kind of teenage lust and awkwardness, but also something that has beauty, that has genuine desire and lust mixed in to it. And I sent it to some passages to friends who very kindly and gently told me where I was going wrong with some descriptions. Certainly some smells and sensory descriptions were cut, but it was only when I got to Garth's class that I really thought about sex as a kind of dance or a choreography and being about bodies in space. If prose is really is conceiving of physical beings in space, sex is emblematic of that, is the kind of like most spatially oriented act. And that was really helpful. And we read so widely. We read from writers like Yoko Ogawa to D.H. Lawrence to Jeanette Winterson. And so that class really helped me to think about the way sex can be described as a literal act and as a metaphorical act. So that was really helpful. Also, he's so knowledgeable and so focused on sentences, like you said. So it really, I guess, attuned my attention to those sentences again. And then Katie was one of my workshop leaders in my final semester. And I think her ability to kind of, when we talk about the novel being restrained, I would put that down to her, or these moments of pause or needing balance. I think she brings in, again, it feels like dance, like knowing where to move and shift weight and how these characters interact. So yeah, they were both unbelievably helpful, and their attention and kind of insight really incredible.
Yeah. And just nice people.
And nice
people. What?
And nice people.
How do you do this? I don't know. It's like I would love to like study with people like that. And then at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. I never want to show you anything I've ever written. Please don't look at me.
Yeah, because you will also show things that are bad, or not bad, but need work, and it's not very helpful. It's important to show stuff that needs work. Like if you just showed stuff that didn't need work, what's the point of being in a workshop? But it's also mortifying. So you're like, yes, I wish I hadn't done that. And Katie, actually, it was this whole chapter that I workshopped in her class. So the restructuring of it and the shifts in the way the characters interacted was really down to that workshop. Expressing moments of intensity but with this restraint is something I really learned from her.
Yeah. And she is like the person that does that. Just like the quietest sentence, but she's delivering this like punch, and you're like, I don't know how you did that. Is always my question with both of their books. I just get to the end, I'm like, how though? How is that a thing? How do you do that?
They have that awful effect of, which is very dangerous when you read another writer's book and you think, right, that is how I'm going to write. And next few days, I'm actually sort of cranking out bad Garth Greenwell and Katie Kitamura sort of fan fiction.
Yeah.
And my style is actually slightly different. So, I can't do it, but I try.
I'd love to ask you how you do write, though. Like, obviously, writing for a program like that is one thing, but is there a set writing life for you? Do you have a practice? Do you have rituals? Are you writing by hand, computer? All the questions.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that my MFA really gave me was a process. And I remember, people talk about it all the time, like, you just need to find your process, find your process. And I didn't really understand what they meant. And I was like, no, tell me how to write a book. But I suppose what that means is how can you write? What makes it bearable for you? Because it is so daunting. And usually it depends where I'm at, what stage I'm at in a project. But if I'm in a getting words down on the page place, it's early, well, not that early morning, but it's first thing in the morning. So it could be as soon as I wake up, or it could be needing to get up and get out of the house and go and write somewhere. But it's usually the morning hours before I've interacted with the internet, before I've looked at my phone. It feels like I'm in a different room and the world is out there and I'm not interacting with it. As soon as I've interacted with the world, I find it quite hard to dip back into that kind of intense initial creative stage. And part of my process that I have learned is that it's not the same always. There's general rules. So like generally when I'm producing material and it's like sort of that kind of creative energy, it needs to be in the morning. And often it needs to be like, I don't even get dressed. I don't even brush my teeth. I just pull on some clothes and I'm in my pajamas and I'm just for like 2 hours. And I can't really do more than 2 or 3 hours a day. So if I do that in the morning, I actually spend the rest of the day kind of recovering. You feel dazed, you feel a bit dizzy, you feel a bit sick, you need to eat something, you need to shower, you feel immediately depressed. It's sort of how I imagine, which is an awful analogy and I hate to say it, but it's how I imagine a kind of macho straight man feels after ejaculating. You're like, ugh, there it is, it's gone. And I feel like sort of spent and wasted. If I'm editing, it needs to be much more like a job. It needs to be much more get up, have your breakfast, do the things you need to do in the morning, get down to it, because it's going to be sort of over a much longer period. And that's going to be a day's work. And again, it depends what kind of editing. So I am not someone who, my first sentence is not my first sentence necessarily, nor is my last sentence my last sentence. I am a very fast writer, but I'm a massive rewriter. So I would say I'm an incredibly inefficient writer. I'm producing a huge number of words that go into the bin all the time for everything. Like, doesn't matter what I'm writing, it could be a little short bio. And it's got several drafts. So when I come to editing, it depends how much work the chapter needs, but often I will start with a blank page. So I will have the chapter I've written on the side, and then I will start from scratch, retyping the bits that I need, and then weaving in the bits that I feel like I need to add. So the shift between scene and memory in the novel is often down to an editing process where I rewrote that chapter and wove in memory, whereas before it might have just been a straight scene. I use a computer. Like very, very early on when I first started writing, I wrote some things down by hand because it felt less distracting and sort of more direct. But now I just write by use a computer. I don't keep a diary, which I feel like is something I'm learning more and more, is maybe part of my process, in that I feel like anything I feel or think goes into my writing and goes into what I'm writing. And if I keep a diary, I often feel, again, I feel spent and I feel like I don't have anything to say. So it's not, I know for a lot of writers, and I really wish I was like this, and I feel a lot of shame about it, actually, because I think of Joan Didion making notes after therapy, could you imagine? So we have to relive it again. But, writers keeping diaries as kind of sketches. But I have instead notes for ideas rather than a diary per se. And I don't have daily writing amounts. I sort of try to, when it's a new draft of something, it's like just a few hours a day. see how you can go. But that has also shifted, and I'll be interested to see how it works in the future for me, because last year I had breast cancer, so I was really ill. I spent most of my time on the sofa and couldn't write at all. And then I'm completely fine now. It was all caught early and completely fine, but it meant that when I came back to writing, my tolerance was much lower initially, and it was my first sort of, well, I have endometriosis as well, but it felt like, it was the first initial really big illness, and now I'm pregnant. So I'm about to lose 5% of my grey matter, which is hell. And I'm like, right now I have a really luxurious relationship with time. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm going to watch an episode of Love is Blind in the middle of the day. That's going to go. So I don't know how I'm going to write in the future. I actually feel pretty scared, but also excited.
Well, A, congratulations on the pregnancy. B, I'm glad you are well. That's good to hear. I'm glad you are all clear. And yeah, I don't know, that's interesting about those changes and seeing what comes of it. I interviewed Olivia Sujic, episode 1. She talks a lot in that episode about when she was writing with like young kids, and like we did the interview while she was like a week away from like labor. So she's like, I'm going to be online if we can. And she was talking a lot about how that space of the pregnancy gave her less time to think, but then actually when we spoke, she was more lucid than I think she imagined she was. And yes, I think there's loads of conversations there around, I don't know, the myth of like, this is the writing life, that how much of that is a kind of standardized, well, this is like a white man in the 1920s who didn't have to work and, had no other stuff going on like that. And how much of that still lingers, I think, in the cultural imagination, right? About what like the writer is and what that means. And that's why I'm glad that I've interviewed so many people, so that listeners, if you want to write, you can just write. Richie Hoffman writes poems in the bath. Amy Key wrote her memoir in bed. It's fine. You can write anywhere, whenever you want.
There's loads of writers, actually, and often the most successful commercially, they're writers with full-time jobs who write in their notes app on the train to work. And I think, wow.
Yeah.
You're amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. What books do you want to recommend to listeners? They can be new things, old things, stuff that's not out yet, anything you want, as many as you want.
Books I would recommend: That They May Face the Rising Sun by John McGahern, which is his last novel and is so beautiful. And when we were talking about novels or passages of writing that just show time passing and the everyday and kind of the beauty of being side by side with someone, I think that's a wonderful book for that. I just finished reading Trespasses by Louise Kennedy, which I really loved. I mean, I read it in about 2 days, less than. Also love Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien. Beautiful, sweeping, epic novel. Again, it was something I read and I was like, I want to write like this. Couldn't construct it. It has this wonderful dialogue between kind of present day North American or Canadian, but sort of North American style prose, and then the character's family in China, and a slightly more expanded it's kind of sweeping a story that shifts and has books in books. And then I also love In the Cut by Susanna Moore.
Yep.
For sex as well. Really good on sex. Really good sort of like dangerous, dark, detective-y, noir. I Love the Years by Virginia Woolf, which is her last one, I think. But I'm a real sucker for passages of description of nature, because I'm always thinking, how does one describe the sky again? It's just been done so many times and I don't really know how to do it anymore. I really love Octavia Butler's short stories, and actually I think Octavia Butler has some of the best advice for writers. Her little manifesto of how to become a writer, I think, is really, really brilliant. I think lastly, a novel that really influenced this book is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. And actually I have to recommend Yoko Ogawa as well, Hotel Iris, which is really nasty. There's a lot of S&M sex between a much older man and a younger girl, but it's really brilliant, sort of eerie hotel by the sea story.
There's a amazing little selection. Thank you so much for doing this. It was really fun. And listeners, go by Jean, Jean, wherever you get books. Madeleine, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For more melancholy queer fiction that we mentioned in the episode, go back to episode 5 with Sean Hewitt. Or for a very different kind of queer fiction about adulthood and relationships, go to episode 20 with Michael Doncor. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube, and share with people in all the places. Follow me and the show on Instagram. Tag me in posts of episodes that you like, and please do fill out the feedback form if you can. You can also get show transcripts and more information by subscribing to the Substack. This show is made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the University of Hertfordshire and the Arts and Humanities Research Council.